Does God, in fact, influence the decisions you make here at the Capitol?
Absolutely. You know, faith and who I am is inseparable from what I do. You know, I set a standard, one that I believe is absolute and truth and inerrant and complete, and I try to stand on that. I don't always hit the mark, but that's where I come from, and that's where I work from, and that's what I try to mirror in the precepts through that faith. And so it absolutely is how I start and hopefully how I finish, and may not always hit the mark, but that's kind of where I start and end with.
Any issues in particular this session that you feel like you turn to your faith for the answer?
You know, I think if you study Scripture, whether you are a religious person or not, or are strong in faith, there's almost every answer to the problems we face as a society is in there, be it you know, anywhere from entitlement to taking care of each other and how you respect and work with people, how you value life and what comes from that. So I'd say it this way, there's probably not an area that I look at that if I really am willing to do the homework that the answer lies there. So I almost use it at pretty much anything I'm working on, specifically the marriage stuff, obviously, that's come up this past week was heavy on our minds. Pro-life's always one of those social issues, as they're called, but I call them life issues. So any of those kind of issues for sure. But there, you know, there's answers to government in Scripture. You know, that's where the origin was. It's where it was mirrored from. The three separations of government was in Isaiah. Romans tells us we submit to authority. That anarchist and chaos is not Christian. You know, you just learn a lot of things if you just take the time to study it a little bit.
Some would argue that a lot of it is up for, you know, it's interpretation and it's a very personal thing. How, you know, you're working in a body of 31, obviously different perspectives come to the table. What do you tell somebody who comes to a different conclusion based on their definition of God or how they interpret this or that?
Well, that's the neat thing about our country. It was based on religious freedom. I mean, if you go back to the Founding Fathers and Mayflower Compact and why we were established, it's the ability to have that freedom of religion. But I believe that the Bible is true, complete, and inerrant, and inspired by God. And the interpretation of that, I believe, is pretty clear if you really devote the time and energy you need to go through it. So those that come up with a different interpretation than what my interpretation would be, if it's centered on a one true God that died, is resurrected, and is here to save us through eternity, give us salvation and hope, then we won't disagree on the core issues. So in the application of some of those precepts, if we differ a little bit, as long as that's a meaning that we can all agree to, I think we can get there. With that said, and you're asking some pretty personal questions here, but I'm okay with that. My faith tells me I have a redemptive God. He doesn't expect for perfection, nor does He know that we can give perfection. But if you're living within His means, you have a repentive spirit. And part of the debate this last week has been you can love everybody beyond all transgression, which is true, but in order to achieve His love, you have to have a repentive spirit because you fail every day. And that's what's missing in the equation. I think Galatians 5:13 says, don't use your freedom for your own personal sinister gain. So you read Scriptures or not, you know, freedom's a two-edged sword. You can be used for good or bad. So through this last debate, what we're missing on some of those people that come up with a different perspective, if you will, if it's all grace or love, then there's an expectation that you're under a repentant spirit. And his is pretty clear on that. The Word is pretty clear that there's consequences of sin. And that is a sin, the way I interpret it. That's where I think the fundamental disagreement might be. Some people would call what we just went through not a sin, but the Bible's pretty clear on that. It's pretty descriptive in numerous areas where that's a sin. And to live under that with no repentive spirit to want to turn away from it, I don't know that you've reached the same conclusion I would ever reach. So,
as a public official, though, do you think you have an obligation to balance your faith with the needs of society or with your lawmaking?
As a public official, I should be respectful and hear all sides and all concerns. But what guides me and what will always guide me, if I am conflicted with God's law or man's law, I will go with God's law every time. And I will work within the confines of the civil authority that He's allowed us to have to fix wrongs. And Roe v. Wade is one of those great examples where in the 70s, early 70s, we made a law that said it's okay to kill the innocent and the unborn. 56 million people later, our kids later, we're still having that discussion. But in Texas, I'm proud to say, we've worked within the confines of the law, and that's effect is a lot more diminished. So I will always work, if this law stands, which all indications it's going to stay here for a while the way it is, my fear is it's going to impede religious liberty, very much so. It's already started today. You're seeing the beginnings of exactly what we predicted, the taking away of some of the tax exemptions, the pursuance of the non-discrimination work as a tool or a means to undermine I think religious liberty organizations and those of faith. So you're already beginning. I mean, it didn't take long to start down this road, but so I will work within the confines of the civil authority we're granted to fix what I believe is against the betterment of the society, because I think God gave us the rules for a stable society.
You mentioned, same-sex marriage. You mentioned Roe v. Wade and the different state laws that Texas has put on the books to, maybe narrow that wide decision that said abortion was okay. Do you see that then? Are you alluding to the fact that now with this ruling on same-sex marriage, next session or perhaps sooner, that'll be what we'll see as far as what parameters the state can put in that can limit the scope of same-sex marriage? I
would hope so. I think it's the wrong decision. I think it's the wrong choice. I think it undermines traditional family even worse than we've undermined it, with 2 generations of entitlement and the dissolving of a family unit as we know it and what we believe to be a healthy model. We're not perfect. People of faith are always accused of being self-righteous and judgmental and perfect. I think it's by very nature of our faith we acknowledge we're not. And we all live to be in accordance with His Word or His law. Fall short every day, but we get up and we don't quit trying to be under that. So I think you'll see this law be scrutinized in any venue or any avenue, I would hope, that is legal and within the confines of our civil authority again to make those changes. I have to protect religious liberty for all, whether it be my faith or not. Our country was based on religious liberty. I may disagree with your faith, but I have no right to impede your faith. Somewhere in this debate, for whatever reason, the Christian faith or the biblical believing faith that's out there got trampled and didn't have a voice. And if I had to set the issue of that aside and went to what concerns me probably as much as anything, it's the process in which this evolved. When you can take a very, very, very small part of society and make such a wide-sweeping change that will honestly have an unintended consequence at many levels going forward. It concerns me a lot that that process was violated the way it was.
On the flip side, I mean, some would say, maybe even some same-sex couples would say that they are Christians and they believe, the love, the virtue of love or whatnot, and that would apply to them. So, I mean, is that something then, an issue where you would disagree with the interpretation?
Absolutely. At the heart of Christian faith is a repentive spirit, which means a turning away. It literally means turn away. I'm a sinner. There's nobody on this earth that walks that's not a sinner. I don't look at homosexuality any different than I would an adulterer, a pornographer, those that are caught up in those lifestyles or bondage. We all have our demons to slay. But to be in that lifestyle and say I'm a self-professing Christian with no expectation of turning away, that's a direct violation of the Christian faith. You have to have a repentive spirit because you know you're going to fall short. But to stay in it and be in it, condone it, and want people to support it as if it's an okay lifestyle, it's just contrary to my faith, and my faith is pretty clear. You can't stay in a sin with no repentive nature, repentive spirit, and be a Christian. So it's just a different interpretation, but it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that He expects a repentive spirit, and that's just not what I hear when I see pulpits, churches, or members in the lifestyle with no expectation of ever removing themselves from it because they've decided in their measure that it's okay.
A lot of these, I mean, Friday we went to the Travis County Clerk's office here where obviously a lot of them were lining up, couples were lining up to do this. I mean, some have been together. The 3 couples we spoke to were 31 years, 14 years, and 14 years that they've been together. They have families and whatnot. When it comes to equality and maybe taking the religion aspect out of it, can you take it out of it?
No, I personally can't, and I understand this is kind of how my personal value system guides me. I can't personally separate the two. I don't love them any less as humans or people. I don't have more compassion or empathy any less than I would anybody. But when they promote something that's direct contradiction to my faith and how I believe most people in this country still believe, in Texas specifically, and even in my home district, it's still, you know, a huge majority. I just think that that's not somewhere I can go. It's just not within my confines to change Scripture. You got to hang on to that absolute truth, even though you and I may disagree with it. If you read it, and if you want to ignore half the truth, you only get half the truth, and that's where I think we're at on a lot of these discussions.
Somebody watching the session, you know, on the live stream or whatnot, this session, and just, you know, hearing your comments, they might think of, and I know, you know, I've been told and seen myself that it's not necessarily written as far as separation of church and state, but go to that thought and say, you know, it's your basis, it's what lays the foundation for your values and what you bring to the floor, but why not separate that out when you're making some policy decisions?
I don't think you want people that don't have a standard. It would be very hard for me if my belief today is one thing and then tomorrow it's something different because somebody or something changed my perspective, political wills of the day. I think that you ought to take great comfort that people are grounded, be you agree with what they're grounded or not, because there's a consistency that you can start and work from, and you can build consensus on some of the bigger issues of the state as far as budgets and things go. But I don't know how you function without an absolute truth and a standard to start and end with. And I think today's society reflects a lot of those, they don't longer exist. Humanism, secularism, so many of the isms that are out there today, it's whatever's good for me. And when you turn inward and you look at yourself and that's your driving agenda or that's your driving force, you really lose your society as a whole. You know, we've got classes now to the point of, rather than being American, rather than being a whole population of one united for a common good, we have created such a diversity by classes and by statute and by law that I'm not sure that we can ever unify again. We've just really done a poor job of promoting what we're about as a nation and as a country, the freedom that exists, but that freedom's been abused for personal agendas or class agendas to the point that it's really disjointed our country. It's not unified on many levels anymore. That's a scary future if we don't figure out how to reunite. Somewhere in this deal, I'll go back to, we were run over as a Christian faith, and that bothers me. And it seems like we're the ones that are assaulted. We're treated no different than an ISIS group out there today. It seems like the rhetoric and the hatred and the visceral speech and Facebook. You know, I came out pretty strong in my community on this decision. It wasn't 5 minutes into that Facebook post. I had nasty, vulgar, vicious, mean-spirited attacks. Now, the Christian faith's not perfect, but that's not something we promote or push. Now, there's going to be those exceptions even in the Christian faith, but it's just a really nasty time that we live in, and it's kind of discerning.
Do you think this is your first session in the Senate, but you were in the House before? Just with your past sessions, how would this session measure up as far as maybe mentions of God, or when you heard, you know, with the guns and it's a God-given right to bear arms and things like that? Do you feel like you heard it more this session as far as a mention of God on the
Well,
floor?
we had a lieutenant governor that came out strong, and I applaud him for that. I like to know where people are at, and I don't mind that they're not with me. I like to know that they're convicted, that they're passionate about something, and from there you can work. You know, you may agree to disagree, but you can work. But this session, we started the session off that way. I was leading up to prayer breakfast on the Senate side. I did it in the House side. Probably one of the best days of the session if you ever get a chance to attend it. You walk away there uplifted and encouraged and moving forward. So this session, probably a little more, I would say, just at least from the Senate side, I noticed it a little more. Not to say that the house side is ungodly people at all. We had a chaplain. We had 3 Bible studies a week actually in the house. So, and I had 2 here this week, this session. So we stayed intact and tuned. You know, there's just a fundamental difference, I think, on this issue at a core level where I look at the inalienable rights that we are granted, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Those are in our DNAs. Those are God-granted. They're God-imaged. And if you look at that context, He wouldn't make something that's contrary to His will. It's just not within Him to create something that's not accurate. So this is a lifestyle and a choice and a decision rather than an actual right that is granted through our pursuit of happiness. I just think that we're always going to have that fundamental debate and probably disagreement, but we got run over is part of my problem. It's just, we just didn't have a voice in this discussion or the decision point. It was foregone way before the day that came Friday. So that kind of, like I say, that if I take the issue out and put the politics in, bad politics, bad process. Our separation of church and separation of powers is clouded. We don't really recognize them anymore.
When somebody comes, I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but I mean, playing the other side, would they challenge that they're trying to pursue happiness?
Yeah, I understand, and happiness is fleeting and it's temporal at some level. It's human. Joy is true joy. It's what you carry with you in your heart regardless of your circumstances. So I hear a lot about I'm happy today, I'm not happy tomorrow. My circumstances dictate my happiness. So that's a hollow argument for me. Because if they're happy today with what they received on Friday through the court system, they're going to be unhappy tomorrow if they're putting their faith and hope in that decision or a man-made action or a man-made law, because they'll be disappointed going forward. It's a different happiness than joy. Joy is scriptural, happiness is human.
And that changes between a heterosexual marriage and a same-sex, as far as that pursuit of happiness?
I think if you're in a heterosexual marriage within the confines of what I believe Scripture tells you it should have been, then you'll have joy. I think that when you're in this context of same-sex marriages, then, you know, I'm not going to judge a man's heart. They may be very happy. I don't know, but does that reach the level of joy that I get as a heterosexual under the confines of what God had ordained? I wouldn't think so.
Mm-hmm. Anything else to add that I didn't hit on? I know this decision from Friday is fresh on your mind, and you know you filed the bill during session to, you know, as far as I guess putting marriage licenses to the Secretary of State
Right.
and limiting funds. You know, is that something you foresee filing again or pursuing?
We'll see where it goes. You know, this is going to be a little different test than the Roe v. Wade test. That was easy. You had a third party. You had a third life involved in the discussion. So that was a little different legislative agenda and how to work through that and around that. On this one, we don't have the third party. You know, there's a lot of debate. I saw a proposal and one that's actually been kicked around. You know, does the state even need to be into marriage license issuing? Is that something they should be involved in? We're going to have some of those debates, I'm almost for sure. We'll have ways to defund, I'm sure, proposed. We'll look at that. I think your challenges are going to be as those individual clerks that in sincere religious beliefs believe they cannot issue that. And those are where the challenges are going to come. And I hope that there's my personal faith would tell me, I hope that there's just a wellspring of people that are pushing back, and that we will support them as a state because it's their right to do it, and defend religious liberties at the end of the day to our fullest extent.
With the clerks, though, I mean, if they don't want to do their duty, like any job, they can just walk away. I mean, you know, when we're talking about religious freedom, or a gay couple wants to go to X church and that church says, you know, I don't support what you're doing, then that's a religious freedom issue. But with a city or municipal or county employee, if they don't want to do their job and it's the law of the land now, do they have a right?
You can't check your faith at the door. I'm not going to ask anybody to ever check their faith, and they'll just be moved to a different job task in that scenario, I would assume. And I would hope that if there's enough of that pushback that it does revert back, maybe not in 16, but several Supreme Court justices replaced down the road, that we can revert that back to the states' rights at a minimum. That's where it should have stayed, at a minimum. Mm-hmm. And that's another aspect of this whole process. They just literally, if not this, if this is not the issue that the state still had left to be able to decide on its own, when so many of them have, and I don't know what else is available for the states to decide. We've got a very overreaching federal government, and federalism, for all practical purposes, in my mind, may have ceased on Friday.